Welcome to another coding tutorial, and in today's video, I'm going to show you how I center a grid of shapes on the canvas. A dear subscriber asked how I center my grid of cubes on the canvas based on my 3D kinetic topography tutorial. Let's start by drawing a rectangle. I'm going to use a function rect, and rect takes in a total of 4 arguments. The first 2 are the x and y coordinate of the top left corner of the rectangle, and then the third and the fourth are the width and the height. So let's set it at 0, 0, and then let's do size, size, and we need to also declare this variable size. Set it to 50. How about that? All right, so now we have this rectangle or a square here. If we want to move it to the center of the canvas, right now we have 2 variables. The first one is the width, right? The width of the canvas. And then the second one is the size of this square. If we subtract the width by the size of this square, we get this part here, which is the margin. But because we want to center this square in the middle of the canvas, we need to divide this margin here by 2. So let's do that. So I'm going to declare x equals to width minus size, and then divide it by 2. All right, so now it's at the center. Height minus size divided by 2. And then we need to also set y here. All right, I'm also let me fill this square white, which it already is, and then I'm gonna draw an ellipse at the center of my canvas so that you can actually see where the center is. If we were to change from rectangle now to an ellipse, now it is not at the center, and that is because the ellipse function takes in 4 arguments also, but the x and y coordinate is the x and y coordinate of the center of the circle and not the top left corner of the bounding box of this circle, right? Unlike the rectangle function. So what we need is that we need to also add an offset of size divided by 2. So based on this, you can see that where the x and y coordinate is on the shape is really important when we try to center things on the canvas. Let's create a grid of shapes. So let's start by declaring columns and rows. So I'm going to set columns to 2 and then rows to also 2. And then inside the draw function, I'm going to create a nested for loop. All right, and then I'm going to put these commands inside here. And I'm going to start with a rectangle or a square. All right, and then let's set this to 0, 0. So you only see one square because all of the squares are drawn on top of each other at coordinate 0, 0. So we want to put in I times size and j times size. And I times size and j times size allow us to draw a grid of squares based on the number of columns and rows that are the distant size apart. So let's try that. To move it to the center of the canvas, let's try to just add x and y here. And based on the square shape, initially we didn't need the offset, right? So let's start with that. The reason that it didn't work exactly how we wanted it to work is because, remember when we did the calculation, which was width minus the size, right? Divided by 2 to get the margin. Now we have 2 columns, which means we need to multiply size here by the number of columns and size here by the number of rows. Let's try that. And it works. And then let's try to change the number of columns and rows here. All right. And so now we can center a grid of squares on the canvas just by changing this expression here. But if we were to do it with an ellipse, you might have guessed that it doesn't work the same way. And basically we just need to add the offset that we had with just one circle. And now it works. So now let's do the WEBGL mode or the 3D mode. The main difference between the 2D and the 3D mode is that the origin points are at a different location. So let's see where is the origin point here. So I'm going to use the rect function, put it at 0, 0, and give it a size of, same thing, 50. It is at the center of the canvas. All right, let's also add an ellipse in the center so that we know where the center of the canvas is. In the WebGL mode, the rectangle, for us to be able to center this shape, we need to add the offset, or in this case, actually subtract the offset to the left and up, right? While if we were to do just an ellipse, now it's already at the center of the canvas. Now let's try to work with a grid of shapes. So let's set the columns to 2 and also rows to also 2. So I'm gonna also write a nested loop. And let's put this in. So first, what we need is we need to change these arguments to I times size and j times size, right? We do want to move it a little bit to the left and a little bit up, and that a little bit is actually an offset of size divided by 2. So if we were to just subtract size divided by 2 to the first 2 arguments here, we would get this grid in the center of the canvas. But I want to show you how I got the logic behind what I did in the other tutorial. So let's start with where it originally was. So now let's try to do, how about 10 by 10? We only see 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5, right? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5 rows and 4.5 columns. But we want to be able to see 10 by 10. We need to move it some amount to the left and some amount up. In order to do this, I want to work with the number of columns and the number of rows that we have. So right now we have 10 by 10, right? And we want to move it by 4.5 to the left and 4.5 up. But 5 is a little bit more than 4.5, right? But 5 is columns divided by 2 and rows divided by 2. So that's why I want to first move it to the left by the number of columns divided by 2 and times that by size, right? So if I do that and then I add this margin here, it's a little bit big for us to see. So how about I set this to 600 by 600? As you can see here, it's a little bit too much that we move to the left and up. By how much? By an offset of size divided by 2, right? So we actually want to move it to this point here, but we moved it here. So that's why we need to add size divided by 2 here and size divided by 2. All right, and now it's at the center. So let's move it back to 400 by 400, and let's change this by about 5 by 3. Then now you can see that we have a shape of circles in the center of the grid. But if we were to do a rectangle, right, it wouldn't work. And that is because of these offset that we put. So we actually need to delete the offset here, right? The size divided by 2. But now we're drawing rectangles and circles in a WebGL or a 3D mode. But actually in the WebGL mode, we would want to be drawing something like a cube, right? So if we were to draw a box, and the box function takes in up to 3 arguments, right? For the width, the height, and then the depth. But if we want the size to be all the same in all directions, we can just put in 1 argument. So I'm going to put in the size. We're going to do no fill as well, so we can see that it is a box. So with the box, the arguments that we can put are the size of the box, or the size of the width, the height, and the depth. We cannot actually put in the location x and y. That's why we need to use a translate function. Because the x and y location of this box is already at the middle. So what we want to use is we want to use the x and y margin that we did previously for the ellipse function. So it's negative columns divided by 2 times size plus size divided by 2, right? And same thing for y, negative rows divided by 2 times size plus size divided by 2. And we can just put x and y in the translate function. And with that, And this is not what we want, and that is because we forgot to put in two important functions called push and pop. And push and pop basically allows us to save the transformations that we want to do, in this case, translate, and then do the translation, and then returns it back with the pop function to the original settings before we call the translate function again. So we want to put push here, then it saves this transformation, and then returns it back to the original settings, which is when the origin point is at the center of the canvas before we do another translation based on the original setting. Oh, silly me, I forgot to put I times size plus I times size, right? So to recap how we center a grid of shapes on the canvas, it depends on where the origin is. Is it at the top left corner of the canvas, or is it at the middle point of the canvas? And it also depends on where the X and Y location is on that specific shape. I hope that this gives you a better understanding of how to center things on the canvas, because these fundamental concepts will go a long way in creating a lot of different graphics involving grid of shapes. Give this one a try.